Now she's lost it because of the nuclear accident.
My family was planning a trip there in the near future. I don't know what's going to happen to that now. This was going to be the time that I was going to get acquainted with all of them and learn about my family there. And, you know, I don't know now whether they're alive or dead or what's happened to them. I don't know if I'll ever have a chance to meet them.
Mary Nissenson, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
One worry that a lot of people have is whether the continuing release the Ukrainian language daily, Svoboda, is going to press. The headlines scream the whole world is talking about the nuclear catastrophe in the Ukraine. The paper's editor-in-chief says last night he finally got a phone call through to a friend in the Ukrainian capital of Kiev. He says people in that city have been told not to drink the water.
The hospitals in Kiev are filled with people with, he feels, burns, because he saw quite a number of people being taken from buses, trucks, ambulances with bandages, bloody bandages all over.
Almost everyone who works at this paper or the English language weekly right next door has family in the Ukraine. Some were afraid to talk to us because they feared their loved ones would suffer reprisals since the papers are considered anti-Soviet. Tamara Kardashinets says she tried to call her family, but the lines were jammed, so she just worries.
We didn't know anything at all. So it was scary, it was shocking, it was very upsetting.
More than 150,000 Ukrainian Americans live in New Jersey. The Fraternal Ukrainian Association has built its headquarters here in Jersey City through some 75,000 members scattered all over the U.S. The head of the association says they are not poor. They have sent telegrams to the White House asking how they can send help to the Ukraine.
First and uppermost is need of medical supplies, because we're thinking about the people who are actually suffering from the results of the fallout.
If there is one overwhelming sentiment here, it is frustration. Frustration at the lack of information coming out of the Soviet Union, and frustration at the inability to help. I'm Roseanne Coletti, Channel 2 News, Jersey City.
Long Islanders touring the Ukraine during this nuclear accident are going to be offered free testing at the Radiation Medical Facility at the Brookhaven National Laboratory upon their return home. Arrangements for that testing were announced by Senator Alphonse D'Amato today. 18 students and adults from Massapequa High School are in Kiev, as were another 30 from Garden City. Roslyn doctor Joel Kotick says when his wife called, the phone line kept going dead every time they brought up the accident.
And we could only talk for another few seconds. And I said, you know, she'll just speak to the tour leader. I said, tell them just, they must get out some way.
And at Kennedy Airport, the first travelers to return from Moscow said they first heard of the radiation when they got to Europe, and technicians began checking their airplane with Geiger counters. And as you may well guess, the nuclear accident is having a negative impact on Americans who plan to travel to the Soviet Union. Our consumer editor, Betsy Ashton, here with that aspect of this story. Betsy?
Well, Jim, so far the cancellations have been to areas close to the site of the nuclear disaster for the city of Kiev, the capital of the Ukraine.
Scope Travel in the heart of the heavily Ukrainian Vailsburg section of Newark books hundreds of tours a year to Kiev, to all parts of the Ukraine.
Я тобі забула сказати, що якщо би ти поїхав на мою туру.
Is it possible for your relatives from Kyiv to meet you somewhere else?
For the past day and a half, they've been flooded with calls from Ukrainian-Americans all over this country who plan to travel there, who have friends touring there now.
They're very much worried, and people are calling in with the persons that are already in Budapest going to Lviv if they're going to come back, and they're trying to get in touch with them in that country.
Many of the callers are canceling out of plans to visit the area.
We would say we've had about a 30% cancellation for the month of May so far, and I expect more cancellations this afternoon and tomorrow.
This agency is complying with a U.S. State Department request that they reroute tour groups away from Kiev. They're sending groups instead to other parts of the Ukraine.
The Soviets still contend there is no reason for tourist groups to avoid the area around Kiev. In this telex sent to this travel agency this morning, In Tourist writes, there are no grounds for worry and revision of itinerary. situation is favorable for the groups to proceed.
Sure enough, Americans who were in Kiev yesterday, who arrived in Moscow this morning, said the Soviets never told them anything was wrong.
Now I'm more concerned because we learned it from you. No one here has told us about it until we talked to you.
It was just beautiful. It was bright. It was a little cloudy yesterday, but we didn't notice anything.
Well, what about travel to other parts of the Soviet Union? Pan American tells us they've had inquiries but few cancellations. They anticipate a huge summer for all Eastern European travel since the terrorists have frightened Americans away from Southern Europe and the Middle East. Rollin?
And the reactor accident is hitting close to home tonight for
light vigil that was held for the people in the Ukraine, and hundreds of people attended as the reports from the Ukraine worsened. Now, the Ukrainian Weekly newspaper, which is published in Jersey City, tonight is reporting from sources that it believes are credible that the disaster may be far worse than any rumors that we've yet heard. After phone calls to 3 relatives in Kiev and Khmelnytsky, Ukrainian Americans have told the newspaper that the casualty toll from the nuclear accident may be 15,000.
The information from Khmelnytsky was 15,000 dead and buried at a nuclear waste site in a little village called Pirohave.
There is, of course, no way to verify these reports. The news reports they have already heard are bad enough for these children at this Ukrainian Catholic school in New York. Many have relatives near the site of the Chernobyl nuclear accident.
I have a feeling that maybe they could cause some illness and they can die then, and then the whole family would be very sad. I'm worried and scared and afraid.
Their parents are frustrated and angry. Natalie Kozira has a brother in Kiev. Her husband's mother is nearby.
Usually it's a village and they don't have phones, and you have to only depend on a letter, which very seldom goes through.
At the Scope Travel Agency, Marijka Helbig has one tour group in western Ukraine, about 300 miles from Kiev, which has chosen to stay. But many prospective tourists aren't going. Even though the stop at Kiev has been canceled, there's been a 30% cancellation rate on a tour going to the Ukraine next month. People can't get through by phone. They're just writing letters and hoping they get through.
Immediately yesterday, when the problem arose, we telexed Moscow, and we got an answer this morning where it says that there are no grounds for worry and revision of itinerary. Situation is favorable for the groups to proceed on the originally confirmed itinerary.
This evening at the crowded candlelight vigil at St. George's, Ukrainian Americans prayed for their homeland, lighting candles, they said, because there is so little else they can do. Now, just in a few minutes, the Ukrainian Congress Committee, which is the group that organized this vigil, is going to hold a news conference in the school that is part of this church. And in it, they're going to demand that the UN declare the Ukraine a nuclear-free zone. They also want the UN to send in expert relief groups so that the victims can be helped and this matter can be gotten under control once and for all. Stephanie Shelton, live in the East Village. Back to you, Sarah and Tom.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. Residents of Poland are taking...
Calendar. Eastern Rite Church, this is Holy Week. Tomorrow is Holy Thursday, Sunday is Easter. At a time when Ukrainian Catholics should be celebrating the joy of Christ risen, instead they contemplate a nation wounded.
My mother is still alive. I have one sister, 2 brothers. They, my sister children, my brother children, they married and they have already children.
No contact with any of them?
Not now. I tried call yesterday. I couldn't, no answer. Nobody answered.
This disaster is developing very slowly. We first thought it was just 2 people or just a little incident, something like 3 Mile Island, but it seems like it's much more than that. It's horrendous, and everybody's just scared to death, and it's, the feeling is growing.
Ukrainians bristle when people mistakenly call them Russians. In fact, Ukrainians have their own language, and since the Mongols overran Kiev in the 13th century, they have served at least 3 masters: the Poles, the Germans, and since World War II, the Soviets. From the pulpit tonight, the pastor of this largest Ukrainian Rite Church in New York complained that Moscow is keeping his congregation in the dark.
We've listened to the shortwave broadcasts, and what do we get in return? we get in return from them the news from Radio Kiev, which was just given an hour ago in our time. Their primary news was that tomorrow is May 1st, the day of the worker.
What more can we do, asked Father PASCHAK. He answered his own question, little more. There is talk of raising relief funds, but for now the wheels of bureaucracy are paralyzed. Even a church effort would require cooperation from Soviet authorities, the same authorities who are saying only 2 people died. Historically, people all over the world turn to their religion and their God in times of worry. Tonight we saw not just worry, but anger etched in the faces and on the voices of the people we spoke with. All they want to know about their relatives, they say, is the truth. Steve Dunlop, Channel 5 News.
When we return, our coverage of
Hundreds. Tourists are mad at the Soviets for letting them travel in Kiev.
I'm very concerned. I think that we should have been.
They crammed by the hundreds into this tiny Ukrainian church on the Lower East Side to sing and to cry together because they're all feeling the same agony. The agony of Vladimira Cheruk, who can only pray her 85-year-old mother and other relatives still in the Ukraine have survived.
My fear is that maybe I hope they live, because I love my family. I love with my heart, you know, I would do anything for them.
To help the large Ukrainian community on the Lower East Side deal with the uncertainty, the pastor here led a prayer for all the loved ones still in the Ukrainian motherland. But along with solace and symbolism tonight came practical action. Tonight, the organizers of this prayer vigil issued a long list of demands upon the Soviet Union and the world community. First and foremost, they want international technical, scientific, medical, and humanitarian organizations to be allowed immediate access to the disaster site to help assess the damage, contain it, and aid the victims.
The time for silence is over. The time is for action. Right now, people are suffering. There should be some relief effort. The Red Cross, the United Nations relief organizations should be helping. Now, if the Soviet Union objects, then this should be made plain.
We'd like the Soviet government to inform the people there what's happening, to tell them that they need to take precautions, such as not to drink the milk, such as not to eat raw or green vegetables, such as to wash all the raw fruit. The Ukrainian people are not getting this information from the Soviet government.
Organizers here say they're going to Washington tomorrow to hold a memorial service for those killed in the disaster and to give Vice President Bush a list of their demands. Demands from a community that is doing all it can, but still feels helpless. Jane Mitchell, Channel 2 News on the Night Beat.
I'm Josh Mankiewicz, a Pan Am.
I just hope that enough of the Ukrainian people survive to carry on. It took the Jews 2,000 years to build the state of Israel. Maybe it'll take us 4,000, but we'll do it too.
This is not the last night of prayer for the Ukrainians. Tomorrow, another vigil in Newark. And then on Friday, a Ukrainian demonstration outside the Soviet mission to protest Soviet nuclear policy against their people. McGee Hickey, News 4, New York.
And
bread ready to serve, and Jerry's Market filled with people buying their meat for the Easter celebration on Sunday. But despite the air of festivity, the heart of the holiday was missing. The heart was back in the homeland in Kiev with their families, families possibly in jeopardy because they live close to where the nuclear accident occurred.
Easter for us is a very joyous holiday, and this happens to be a very sad occasion.
There are 100,000 Ukrainians living in New York City. About 25,000 of them are located here on the Lower East Side. St. George's Ukrainian Catholic Church has become the pillar of this community, and many of them have come here to seek solace during this time of crisis.
I come here to pray for all those people who suffer around them, especially for the Easter. Now the Easter, we prepare everything for the Easter. Maybe they are in the hospital, maybe dead, or nobody knows what happened to them.
There's no communication. It's like a nuclear curtain of silence has come down. There was an iron curtain, a bamboo curtain, now we have a nuclear curtain that comes down.
Unfortunately, there's not much the Ukrainians here can do except wait. It can be frustrating and at times maddening. But even when they try to get information, they say they learn nothing. And have you heard anything from them at all? Do you know how they are?
Right now we not heard nothing. It's impossible. This is impossible to talk, to hear somebody or something about. It's very impossible. Because, you know, I told you, if you even reach somebody, they don't want to talk. They don't want to talk.
Why can't they talk?
Because they are afraid. They are afraid. They are afraid for the government.
Despite the concerned and somber mood here on the Lower East Side, the Easter celebration on Sunday will go on, but clearly the minds of many will be remembering their relatives back in the Ukraine. In Manhattan, Rosanna Scotto, Channel 5 News.
And angry protesters showed up at the Soviet UN mission in Manhattan today. They accused the Soviets of covering up just how massive the accident really is, and some of them also demanded both Moscow and Washington stop all use of nuclear energy. Ukrainian-Americans groups are promising a much bigger demonstration tomorrow evening at the mission.
Still ahead more what that nuclear...
National labor solidarity. All filmed to show life going on as usual under an atomic cloud of fear and suspicion in the outside world. The nuclear disaster is gradually being transformed into an East-West political confrontation. We saw a glimpse of that today when the committee chairman lectured the Soviet diplomat, saying instead of celebrating May Day, you people should have been yelling Mayday to warn your neighbors of the dangers. To which the Soviet diplomat replied, if Americans think they can talk to us in that tone of voice, forget it.
Scandinavia, basically, in other words, Northern Europe. But today, the cloud moved down to Central Europe and now covers extensive areas like Poland and East Germany and West Germany, as well as places like Northern Italy. You can see all the way down here. Now, the good news is that France and the UK and the Netherlands have not picked up any really significant amounts of radiation thus far. That shield is just kind of sitting stationary over Central Europe, and I can show you why. If we take a look at the wind circulation over that part of the world, there's a stationary high-pressure system over Europe, Central Europe, actually. The winds are just kind of shifting around in the lower levels and holding this radiation area just about where it is. Now, eventually, this is going to either break up or be carried up into the upper levels of the atmosphere. And under those circumstances, the jet stream winds, which are about 20 or 25,000 feet, will begin to pick it up and begin to carry that radioactive cloud out of Europe and then back across the Soviet Union, Siberia, north of Japan. You can see it dip over into the central part of the Pacific Ocean, and then finally it winds up over North America.
Live in the United States, that some folks in Kiev have been told that it might not be a bad idea if they were to get their children out of Kiev for the summer. We here in Moscow are attributing part of that to the extraordinary crowds that we were seeing get off Kiev trains today. The Soviets are saying, and with some justification, that because this is a three-day weekend in the Soviet Union celebrating the victory over fascist Germany in World War II, that's the reason that these Ukrainians are coming up to Moscow to spend this festive three-day weekend here.
Soviet officials did say today wind shifts have blown more radiation over the Kiev area. The running battle between...
And at the Chernobyl plant itself, Pravda says that decontamination teams are tunneling under the damaged reactor, trying now to neutralize it, while helicopters dump more sand on the reactor core. Well, for 5 hours...
In a strikingly candid interview published in Pravda, the official Communist Party newspaper, a leading Soviet nuclear physicist, Yevgeny Velikov, described the desperate Chernobyl crisis. He said, "The unusual situation calls for the solution of problems with which neither scientists nor specialists had ever dealt before. The struggle to contain the radioactivity is not over, and thousands of people are conducting that struggle with even more fury than before." Faced with an apparently worsening disaster, the Soviets today allowed experts from the International Atomic Energy Agency to fly to Chernobyl.
Well, we have seen the site from the air. And we have seen that a little smoke is still coming up from the damaged plant. We have also seen that there is a lot of activity to contain the reactor.
При отделе печати МИД СССР.
104. Well, we apologize. We're having some technical difficulty there. Radioactive fallout from the Soviet nuclear accident has now been detected in the air in 3 western U.S. cities. The EPA has found tiny amounts of airborne radioactivity in Richland, Washington, Cheyenne, Wyoming, and Denver, Colorado. The EPA says the airborne levels are so low they pose no danger to residents. Now, previously, the radiation had been detected only in rainwater in several locations. Mort?
As the Soviets try to smolder the fire at Chernobyl, Long Island lawmakers are trying to kindle